Saul Canelo Alvarez re-establishes himself as the undisputed super middleweight champion with a dominant display over Gennady Golovkin. I had 11 and 12 going to Golovkin for sure. Apart from that, only the 9th and the 1st were potential swing rounds. So anywhere between 8-4 and 10-2. Personally, I felt it was 10-2 to Canelo Alvarez. Let's talk about why this was so one-sided for such a long period of time and why Golovkin struggled really to get going. So we're going to get technical. We're also going to talk a little bit about Canelo Alvarez's future, because there were one or two things that were concerns, in my opinion, if you're a Canelo fan and you are going to watch him fight a Charlo or a Benavidez or a Bivol Zerdo rematch winner. We'll also talk about Golovkin and his potential future too. So first and foremost, the first round, what became apparent to me is that although he was pumping the jab well, Gennady Golovkin, he was slower in responding to Canelo's punches. The jabs of Canelo were very, very fast, but they were in the second fight too. And Golovkin was able to have the reflexes to be able to evade a lot of those shots. He wasn't able to today. That became a key moment, a key area in him having to change up a tactic which prevented him from being competitive. In the preview, we spoke about Jonathan Banks's idea of how Golovkin should approach this fight. And that would be to box Canelo Alvarez in the center of the ring rather than chase him down and hunt him or getting on the back foot and moving around the ring. And we explained in the preview that this could potentially work if Gennady Golovkin was still capable of doing what he used to do, physically speaking. And I personally did not think that was the case anymore. I explained in the preview, the only undefeated fighter in history, something that I've said a lot of times on this channel, is Father Time, and he was hot on the heels of Gennady Golovkin. So I'm not surprised to have seen what we've seen. But the key to boxing Canelo in the middle of the ring without running away is to understand that being on the edge of range, that distance control is vital. You're on the edge of range and you just step slightly out when he throws his big shots and you're close enough to come back in to let go of your own big shots. And in the preview to the Canelo-Bivol fight, one of the reasons I said that I couldn't see how Canelo was going to beat Bivol unless Bivol was going to get robbed is because of that key skill that Bivol has, the ability to do that. Because Canelo Alvarez likes to overload with big shots, big, powerful, accurate shots, but he puts so much into them, it requires a slight reset between him finishing a combination and then resetting to go again. Within that reset, you need to be able to go after him and punish him. So if he gets his shots off, you're immediately going to punish him. Well, what happened is when Golovkin realized he wasn't able to react fast enough with his reflexes to evade Canelo Alvarez's shots, when Canelo was then stepping in with power shots, Golovkin would turn off at the side, at the shoulder, and step out. But he would come so far out beyond the edge of range that he was too far out to then come back in again to punish him. If you notice that a lot of the shots that Canelo was throwing, he would throw a 1-2 and he was almost catching Golovkin on the top of the hip because Golovkin's turning off and jumping out to maximize that distance, and Canelo's trajectory of punch would almost catch him on the hip. He was too far out to then come back in. And that became a real problem. Now, from the 9th onwards, he decided, I'm going to stay in the pocket or just on the edge of range. And yeah, I'm going to have to eat some shots, but I'm going to get my own shots off. And you could make a very real case that of the last 4 rounds, he possibly won 3 of them. He definitely won 2 of them. He may have won 3 of them. That doesn't necessarily mean if he was to get going earlier that he would have won the fight. Because had he gotten more aggressive earlier and stayed in the pocket, Canelo would have been sharper too. And this is one of the concerns that you should have if you're a Canelo Alvarez fan. Why is it that in a fight where this tempo was quite low, certainly low by the standards of the first 2, why did Canelo still look gassed in the last 4 rounds? He looked like he was tiring. Why? Gennady Golovkin, we spoke in the preview that if he was going to have success with power shots against Canelo, because Canelo's got really good reflexes and he likes shots that are coming from wide. He likes to see hooks from a rising position and he'll just turn with them and then come back in with a counter. That he had to stay low, and I showed you again in that 12th round, we looked at the 12th round of their second fight, how he was shooting through the center line at points with the uppercut, and how I wanted to see him bring in shovel hooks as well to the body, target the body, do that a lot more to Canelo Alvarez, and maybe you're going to be able to sort of take out enough of the lungs so that he's tiring later on, and maybe you can then start to go to work later and potentially take him out. Golovkin wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't landing to the body really. He added the odd right hand to the body, nothing major. There was no real significant punishment to Canelo's body. He wasn't forced to work at a tempo that he was uncomfortable at working at in those first 8 rounds. So why did it lead to him looking so gassed? You know, I've read a few people talk about the changes in diet of Canelo. Someone suggested, I don't know how true this is, someone on Twitter suggested that he'd gone vegan recently. If that's the case, that's not conducive to fighting. I don't care. I'm sorry. This is not a political discussion. You guys do what you want, believe what you want. He needs to stop that and needs to get back on a fighter's diet, if that's the case, right? Red meat, for a start, increases red blood cell production. Red blood cells are what carry oxygen around the body. Okay, so if he's done something like that, I don't know. There are other people talking about him having a knee injury and not being able to do road work. If that's the case, swim a lot more. If you've got an issue with stamina, you need to address it. If it's a natural issue, though, if it's nothing to do with, everybody's got a capacity, everyone's got a ceiling, he might just not have that. He might be more explosive as an athlete, an anaerobic athlete rather than an aerobic one, just like Anthony Joshua. Then there will be a ceiling as to what he can do in terms of stamina. But this sort of tempo of a fight might not have led to him looking gassed in the last 4 rounds earlier in his career. Are we starting to see Canelo Alvarez age? Maybe going up in weight category and then coming back down might have hurt him because he puts on bulk, he puts on muscle. This is not a guy that gets fat and you can just go on a bit of a diet. Is going up and down in weights an issue for Canelo? So that's something you need to consider. There were points where he looked really sharp. You know, he was snapping that neck to the side when Golovkin was trying to throw a left hook just to take something off it, and then he would, you know, take a couple of slow steps back and posture, playing up to the crowd. He had his swagger about him. He looked good at points, Canelo Alvarez. He looked very sharp with the jab, very fast jab. So, you know, don't for 1 minute think that this guy can't beat all the other top super middleweights like Benavidez or Charlo, or, you know, don't think that he can't be a force at light heavyweight. He potentially still can. But there are concerns there. That's my opinion. Let me know what you think. The other concern for Canelo Alvarez is something that Outmatch Boxing touched upon in his preview. Shout out to Outmatch. The fact that Canelo Alvarez is not somebody that goes through the gears particularly well. He will break you down methodically. There is a methodical destruction to Canelo Alvarez. But he's not a guy that will go through the gears. And Outmatch basically predicted that Canelo Alvarez would win the fight on points as a result. And he's right. That's what happened. Because at no point today did Canelo Alvarez really put his foot on the gas, start going through the gears, and start to up the pressure on Gennady Golovkin. Not one time did Golovkin's back hit the ropes. Canelo's did. Canelo's hit the ropes on a couple of occasions. Golovkin's did not. You're hunting the dude in theory. And not one time are you able to get his back on the ropes, a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin. You've now boxed 3 times and you haven't been able to get his back on the ropes once. Now, for a pressure fighter, that's not great. I know you managed to get Bivens back on the ropes, but he willingly went back on the ropes, covered up and then would pivot out. You forced Callum Smith back onto the ropes. You did it to Billy Joe Saunders. You did it to Caleb Plant consistently. I'm not saying he can't cut off a ring, don't get me wrong. But against the 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin, did he look a little bit tentative himself at points? You know, did he not want to go on the hunt too much? Was he wary? Or was it a stamina issue? Was he conserving? In which case, that's a concern. Because if you can't go through the gears in order to push the guy, well, what happens when a fight's not going to be as comfortable as this against guys who are younger and are better athletically than Gennady Golovkin? But in terms of the skill set, the upper body movement, the punch variation, the selection, top class as ever. Now, with regards to Golovkin, he spoke about having 3 belts still at middleweight and how he'd love to go back down there and dominate, and he's far from done, and so on and so forth. Listen, he still carries a lot of power. The technique of Golovkin is superb. We also saw that he's still durable. He still has a chin. So a lesser fighter than Canelo Alvarez at middleweight could very well fall victim to Gennady Golovkin still. He still carries that power. He can still hurt anybody, and so on and so forth. But this wasn't a case of Gennady Golovkin simply going up to super middleweight and looking a little bit heavy because he's packed on the extra pounds. If that was the case, he could have come in at 161 pounds above the middleweight limit. He didn't have to come in at 167.8. He packed on the timber because he's close to 40. He wanted some protection for the body. And he's of a certain age at the moment. And that's what made him slower. He was slower to react. It's got nothing to do with him being at an unhealthy weight category or an unnatural weight category for him. You know, had this fight happened at middleweight, it would have looked exactly the same. Right? So it's not as though he's going to suddenly rectify these errors. But he can still take out some guys at middleweight. But why? I would like to see him walk away from the sport. Maybe he still wants to become an undisputed champion and he wants to aim for that at middleweight in order to really solidify his legacy. I can sort of understand that. I get that. He's got a dangerous fight if he wants to do that. Let's put it that way. Alim Kanuli would potentially be a real banana skin for him. Chris Eubank Jr. has shouted out on Twitter that he wants to fight in December, if possible, and so on and so forth. I don't know what Golovkin's going to choose to do. But one thing I will say, too many people watch too many Marvel movies and stuff like that. They think there's superheroes in this world. Human beings wilt. They age. You know, I'm going to digress a little bit, but I was in Greece a few years ago and I went to this monastery and they had this icon up, and this icon was obviously preaching a gospel message, but it had this wheel of life. And at the top, at 12 o'clock, so to speak, there was a baby. And it shows you how this baby grows through life and how the priorities of the baby changes. So when the baby's a toddler at like 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., he's playing with toys. When the baby's a little bit older, becomes an early teen, really mad about sports. After that, he's mad about going to the gym and getting a nice physique. After that, it's all about women. After that, he wants to get to the top of his industry and make a lot of money and stuff like that. As he passes that threshold at 6 p.m. and he starts to go on the back end of life, he starts to decline. His hair starts to go grey, then he starts to lose it, he starts to become older, more frail, and it shows his priorities changing as time goes by. And he starts to ask about the meaning of life and the bigger issues regarding the family, the well-being of his family, and more spiritual questions. And the moral of the story there was that every single human being will go through this path if they're lucky. If they're not lucky, they can die at an earlier stage of life. And what this icon was telling you is that you better get right with God and be a good person and a good man and good to those around you and treat strangers with love, because at any given moment your soul could be taken away. But if it's not taken early, you are guaranteed to wilt. So everything that you put on a pedestal as important in your early years will lose value as you get older. So learn from a younger age, be wise to prioritize what is genuinely important in life. That's the point of the icon. Now, the story of that, the moral of that story applies to Gennady Golovkin, Canelo Alvarez, and whoever else. Roy Jones Jr., a physical phenomenon that people looked at and just thought, this is possibly the best athlete I've ever seen. And then look at what happened to Roy Jones towards the end of his career. Gennady Golovkin is 40 years old. I don't care if he's got 3 belts at middleweight. He should have, in my opinion, 2 victories over Canelo Alvarez. Hopefully history treats him in a manner that is just. This is one of the best middleweights of all time when you are judging him in his prime, in his peak. He is one of the best middleweights. He's right up there with Hagler, with Monzon. He's a great middleweight. He can't keep chasing a legacy now, in my opinion, just because there are going to be doubters out there. There will always be doubters out there. If he goes and becomes super middleweight undisputed champion, there are still going to be people that are doubting him. You're never going to get that. There are always going to be haters out there. That's just how it is. You want to leave with your faculties intact. Apparently he's made $20 million from this fight. Go and enjoy it, man. Don't pursue something that's going to affect your long-term health. That's my opinion when it comes to Gennady Golovkin. Let me know if you disagree. Before I go, one last thing. The scorecards. They were a lot closer, right? Almost like a PR stunt here. They kind of knew that Canelo Alvarez had this in the bag. So why not make it a lot closer, seemingly closer, so that if anybody ever says, Canelo always gets favoritism in Vegas. Whoa, that's not true. Canelo Alvarez may have won 10 rounds. Why would they make it 115, 113? Anyway, let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Please don't forget to hit a Gennady Golovkin type jab on the like button, a Canelo Alvarez right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut from either guy. They've both got terrific uppercuts on the notifications button. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.